Blood washes off hands, but the copper smell stays in your pores. Sadie knew that better than anyone. She made $16 an hour emptying bedpans and taping up lacerations in a clinic that smelled heavily of bleach and quiet despair. She didn't have the time or the money to play savior. But when you find an old woman bleeding out in the freezing rain, you don't check her resume. You just stop the bleeding. That was Sadie's first mistake. The neon sign of the bodega at the corner of 4th and Pike had been flickering for 3 years. Tonight, it buzzed with a wet, angry sound, casting erratic red shadows across the flooded pavement. Sadie's shift at St. Jude's Urgent Care had ended an hour ago, but the bus was late. Again. Her feet throbbed inside her cheap sneakers. The rain was the kind that didn't just fall. It drove sideways, finding every gap in her nylon jacket. She tucked her chin against her chest, clutching a lukewarm cup of gas station coffee, and took the shortcut through the alley behind the butcher shop. It smelled like rotting cabbage and wet cardboard. She almost tripped over the pile of rags. She would have kept walking. In this neighborhood, you stepped over sleeping bodies and minded your own business. But the pile of rags groaned. It was a thin, ragged sound, a wet lung trying to inflate. Sadie stopped. She sighed, her breath pluming in the cold air. "Hey," she said, nudging the bundle with the toe of her shoe. "You can't sleep here. You'll freeze." No answer. Just another wet, rattling inhale. Sadie knelt, the dirty water instantly soaking through the knees of her scrubs. She pulled back a layer of heavy, sodden wool. It wasn't a vagrant. It was an older woman, late 60s, maybe early 70s. Her silver hair was plastered to her forehead with mud and something darker. "Ma'am?" Sadie placed 2 fingers against the woman's neck. The pulse was there, but it was a hummingbird flutter. Fast, weak, threading out. Sadie's eyes adjusted to the dark. The woman was wearing a coat that felt inexplicably soft beneath the grime. Cashmere. Underneath it, a silk blouse, and blooming across the lower left abdomen of that pale silk was a massive, spreading stain of blackish red. Shit! Sadie dropped her coffee. It spilled into a puddle, brown swirling into red. Professional instinct kicked in, overriding the bone-deep exhaustion. Sadie unzipped her own jacket, ignoring the freezing rain lashing against her neck, and pulled off her thick woolen scarf. She ripped open the woman's coat. The wound was low, under the ribs. A puncture. A blade, twisted and pulled out violently. Sadie balled up her scarf and pressed it directly into the wound. The woman's back arched. Her eyes snapped open. They were a pale, striking hazel, cloudy with shock. "Don't move," Sadie said, putting all her upper body weight onto her hands, pressing down hard on the woman's stomach. "You're bleeding out. I'm stopping it." The woman's hand, frail but adorned with a heavy, unostentatious gold ring, came up and gripped Sadie's wrist. Her nails dug into Sadie's skin. It hurt. Sadie didn't pull away. "Who?" the woman rasped, blood bubbling slightly at the corner of her pale lips. "Sadie, I'm a nurse. You're going to be okay." It was a lie. You don't lose this much blood in an alley on a Tuesday night and walk away okay. "Who did this to you?" The woman just stared at her. Her grip on Sadie's wrist loosened. Her eyes rolled back. "Hey, no, stay with me!" Sadie looked around. The alley was dead. No one was coming. Calling an ambulance meant waiting 10 minutes for dispatch, and another 20 for a rig to actually cross into this zip code. By then, the woman would be a corpse in Kashmir. St. Jude's clinic was 3 blocks away. "All right, Grandma," Sadie muttered, her teeth chattering. "This is going to suck for both of us." Keeping one hand clamped hard over the improvised pressure dressing, Sadie hooked her other arm under the woman's armpit. She hauled her up. The woman was small, but dead weight is heavy. Sadie's back screamed. Her knees popped. They staggered out of the alley. Sadie half-carried, half-dragged the unconscious woman through the driving rain, leaving a faint, washing trail of pink on the wet concrete behind them. The fluorescent lights of St. Jude's hit Sadie's eyes like a physical blow as she kicked the double doors open. The waiting room was empty, save for a guy sleeping off a high in the corner. Behind the plexiglass counter, Rita, the night receptionist, looked up from her magazine. Her jaw dropped. "Gurney, now!" Sadie yelled. Rita scrambled. 30 seconds later, Dr. Orris, a man who looked like he hadn't slept since 1998, was helping Sadie hoist the woman onto the vinyl bed in Trauma Bay 1. "What happened?" Orris asked, grabbing a pair of shears and cutting away the ruined cashmere and silk. "Found her in the alley off 4th. Puncture wound, left lower quadrant. Looks like a knife. Heavy blood loss, unresponsive for the last 5 minutes." Sadie was already moving, slapping an oxygen mask over the woman's face, tearing open an IV kit. She found a vein on the back of the woman's hand. It was flat, difficult. But Sadie was good. She got the line in on the first try and hooked up a bag of saline, squeezing it to push the fluids faster. "BP is tanking," Aris said, packing gauze into the laceration. "She needs a hospital, Sadie. We don't have blood here. We don't have an OR." "I know, but she wouldn't have made it to General. Stabilize her first, then we call the bus." They worked in silence for 20 minutes. The practiced grim ballet of underfunded medicine. Aris managed to clamp a severed artery just beneath the muscle wall. He threw a dozen messy, utilitarian stitches into the skin to close the gap enough to pack it tightly. The heart monitor, previously beeping an erratic Morse code of panic, settled into a slow, steady rhythm. Sadie stepped back. She was covered in blood. It was on her scrubs, her hands, smeared across her cheek where she had pushed her hair back. She stripped her gloves off and threw them in the biohazard bin. "I'll call EMS," Rita said from the doorway, her voice shaking slightly. "Hold off!" a voice rasped. Sadie and Eris both turned. The woman's eyes were open, the oxygen mask fogged with every shallow breath. She reached up with a trembling hand and pulled the plastic mask down to her chin. "Put that back on," Sadie said, stepping forward. "No hospitals," the woman whispered. Her voice was weak, but it carried a strange, heavy authority. "Mom, you were stabbed," Aris said patiently. "You have internal damage. We stabilized you, but you need a surgeon." I said, "No hospitals." The woman turned her head, fixing those pale hazel eyes on Sadie. "You, the girl from the rain." "Sadie," she corrected, crossing her arms. She was too tired for difficult patience. "Look, lady, I don't care if you've got warrants or you're avoiding a bill collector. You need a real doctor. Call this number." The woman rattled off a 10-digit sequence. She didn't repeat it. She just stared at Sadie, expecting her to remember it. "Tell them. Carmela is at St. Jude's." "Carmela," Sadie repeated. "I'm not calling anyone but an ambulance." "If you call an ambulance," Carmela breathed, a ghost of a smile touching her pale lips, "the people who put this hole in me will find me in the ICU. And they will kill me, and anyone standing next to me." The room went dead silent. Aris swallowed hard. He looked at Sadie. Sadie looked at the woman. She didn't look crazy. She looked entirely, terrifyingly lucid. Sadie sighed, walked over to the wall phone, picked up the receiver, and dialed the number. It rang once. "Yeah," a voice said. A man's voice, deep, rough like gravel. "I have a woman named Carmela here," Sadie said, staring at the old woman on the bed. "She's got a hole in her stomach. She said to call you." There was a pause on the line, the kind of pause that feels like all the air being sucked out of a room. "Where are you?" The voice didn't rise in panic. It dropped into something much colder. "St. Jude's Clinic, South Side." Click. Sadie hung up. He hung up. 10 minutes passed. Sadie was washing her hands at the sink, scrubbing the dried blood from under her fingernails with a bristled brush. She was thinking about rent. She was thinking about the fact that she was going to have to walk home in the rain without her scarf. Then, the low hum of heavy engines vibrated through the floorboards. Tires screeched on the wet pavement outside. Not one car. Several. Doors slammed in unison. Rita let out a small shriek from the front desk. Sadie grabbed a towel, drying her hands as she walked out of the trauma bay into the hallway. Through the glass front doors, she saw them. 3 black SUVs parked at brutal angles, blocking the street. Men were pouring out of them. They weren't street thugs. They wore dark overcoats. They moved with coordinated, terrifying precision. The front doors were shoved open. The wind and rain swept into the lobby, and with it, the violence. They flooded the small waiting room. 6 men. They didn't draw weapons, but they didn't need to. The way they stood, the way they looked at the room, they owned the space, and they owned everyone in it. Rita was cowering behind the plexiglass. Aris froze in the hallway. Sadie didn't freeze. She was annoyed. She tossed the paper towel into a trash can. "Hey, you can't park those there. This is a loading zone." The men parted. A man walked through the center of them. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Sadie's annual salary. His dark hair was damp from the rain, pushed back carelessly. But it was his face that made the breath catch in Sadie's throat. It wasn't handsome in a conventional way. It was carved out of granite and bad intentions. He had a strong jaw, a slightly crooked nose that had clearly been broken and reset, and eyes so dark they looked like bruised glass. He looked exhausted, but underneath the exhaustion was a coiled, furious energy. He didn't look at Rita. He didn't look at Aris. He looked straight at Sadie. "Where is she?" he asked. His voice was the gravelly one from the phone. "Trauma Bay 1, Sadie said, pointing a thumb over her shoulder. "But you can't all go back there. It's sterile adjacent." He walked past her, ignoring the instruction. 2 of the massive men followed him. Sadie stepped in front of them, putting a hand on the chest of the largest one. It felt like pushing against a brick wall. I said, "Not all of you. He can go." She nodded toward the man in the suit. "You guys stay here and read some old magazines." The large man looked down at her hand, then up at her face, his expression completely blank. He reached into his coat. "Let her be, Paulie." The man in the charcoal suit had stopped at the door of the trauma bay. He looked back at his guard, then at Sadie. His dark eyes flicked over her bloody scrubs, lingering on her stained hands. "Stay here," the man told his guards. He stepped into the trauma bay and closed the curtain. Sadie stood in the hallway, surrounded by 4 silent men who looked like they killed people for a living. She leaned against the wall, crossing her arms. She was too tired to be properly terrified. Inside the room, she heard the low, urgent murmur of voices, the man's voice, rough and frantic, and Carmela's, weak but steady. 5 minutes later, the curtain was ripped back. The man stepped out. He looked at Aris. "You the doctor?" Aris nodded, terrified. Yes." "Did you do the stitches?" "I clamped the artery," Aris stammered. "But she needs a real facility. We don't have blood transfusions." "My people are bringing a private medical team and an ambulance. They'll be here in 3 minutes." The man pulled a thick stack of bills from his inner pocket, bound with a rubber band. He tossed it onto the chart desk. "That's for your silence. The cameras in this place?" "Broken," Sadie chimed in. "Have been since last November." The man turned his gaze back to Sadie. He closed the distance between them. Up close, he smelled of rain, expensive cedar, and the metallic tang of adrenaline. He looked down at her. She didn't look away, though her heart was finally starting to hammer against her ribs. "My mother says you found her." "I did." "In an alley?" "Yes." "What were you doing in an alley?" His voice was low, suspicious. Sadie let out a harsh, dry laugh. "Walking to the bus stop. Sorry I didn't take the scenic route." His eyes narrowed. "You're a nurse?" "No, I just wear these bloody scrubs for the fashion statement." She matched his stare. "Look, buddy, your mum was bleeding to death. I stopped the bleeding. I dragged her here. Dr. Orris sewed her up. If you're going to interrogate me, do it quickly, because my shift ended 3 hours ago, and I want to go home." One of the guards stepped forward, offended by her tone. The man held up a hand, stopping him. He stared at Sadie for a long moment, dissecting her. Looking for a lie, looking for a setup. He found nothing but a worn-out girl with bags under her eyes and dried blood on her face. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Sadie." "I'm Dominic." He didn't offer his hand. "You saved her life." "I bought her an hour," Sadie corrected him. "She still needs a surgeon. The knife nicked her liver. She'll have the best." Dominic looked back toward the curtain. "Why didn't you leave her in that alley?" "Most people would have walked away." Sadie thought about it. She thought about the cold and the rent and the sheer apathy of the city. "Because she asked me not to move," Sadie lied, "and I'm a sucker for old ladies." Dominic didn't smile, but something in his dark eyes shifted. The suspicion dialed back a fraction, replaced by something heavier, something observant. "I don't believe in coincidences, Sadie," Dominic said, his voice dropping so low only she could hear it. "Someone knew her route. Someone knew her detail was light tonight. If I find out you had anything to do with this..." "You'll what?" Sadie snapped, finally pushing off the wall. The exhaustion was morphing into anger. "Kill me? Go ahead. It'll save me from paying off my student loans. I don't know who you are, and I don't know who she is. I was just trying to buy a cup of coffee." "You want to threaten the person who kept your mother's guts inside her body?" "Be my guest." The silence in the hallway was absolute. The guards tensed. Dominic just looked at her. Really looked at her. For the first time, he saw the tremor in her hands. The way she was holding herself together by sheer, stubborn grit. Before he could speak, the wail of sirens cut through the night. Not police. A private ambulance, pulling up outside, flanked by 2 more SUVs. Paramedics rushed in, carrying a stretcher and trauma bags. Dominic stepped aside to let them through. He watched as they loaded his mother, barking medical jargon at each other. As they wheeled Carmela past, her hand reached out from the blankets. "Sadie," she murmured. Sadie stepped forward. "I'm here." "Good girl," the old woman whispered, before slipping back into unconsciousness. Dominic watched the exchange. He turned to leave, following the stretcher out into the rain. He paused at the door, glancing back at the empty waiting room, the terrified doctor, and the girl in the bloody scrubs. He didn't say a thank you. He just walked out into the storm. Sadie watched the taillights fade into the wet city streets. She looked down at her hands, then at the thick stack of cash sitting on the desk. "Well," Sadie muttered to the empty room. That's one way to pay rent. The money smelled like stale roast and dirty paper. Sadie had shoved the thick, rubber-banded stack of bills into an empty Folgers coffee can and stuffed it in the back of her freezer. $50,000. It was sitting behind a frozen bag of peas and half a loaf of bread. 3 days had passed since the alley. St. Jude's Clinic was closed indefinitely. Dr. Aris hadn't shown up for his next shift. Rita quit via text message. The landlord of the building put a padlock on the front doors. Just like that, Sadie was unemployed. She sat on her sagging futon, staring at the muted television. Rain lashed against the single window of her studio apartment. The radiator clanked, spitting out more noise than heat. She checked her bank app. $14.32. She could pull $100 from the coffee can, buy groceries, pay the electric bill before it was shut off on Friday. But touching the money felt like signing a contract she hadn't read. A heavy knock rattled her door. Sadie froze. Her apartment was on the 4th floor of a walk-up that didn't have a working buzzer. Nobody knocked. Her neighbors mostly screamed at each other through the drywall or passed out in the stairwell. The knock came again. 3 sharp, measured raps. She walked to the door, placing her hand flat against the peeling paint. She pressed her eye to the scratched peephole. The fisheye lens distorted the hallway, but she didn't need perfect clarity to recognize the shoulders. It was the giant from the clinic. Poorly. Sadie swallowed hard. She looked at the deadbolt. It was locked, but the doorframe was rotting. One solid kick from Paulie, and the wood would splinter like a matchstick. She undid the chain and turned the lock. The door swung open. Paulie stood to the side. Dominic was standing behind him, wearing a dark wool overcoat that made the dim, mouldy hallway look instantly smaller. He wasn't smiling. "You're a hard person to track down," Dominic said. "I live in apartment 4B. It's literally on the mailbox." Sadie didn't step back to invite him in. "What do you want? I didn't say anything to anyone. The clinic is shut down. Your money is in my freezer." "I don't care about the money," Dominic said, stepping forward. He didn't push her, but his presence forced her to take a step back. He crossed the threshold. Paulie stayed in the hall, pulling the door shut behind his boss. Dominic looked around the apartment. It took him 2 seconds to assess the entirety of her life. The stained kitchenette, the unmade futon, the pile of medical textbooks stacked on a milk crate. His dark eyes gave nothing away, but Sadie felt the heat of embarrassment crawl up her neck anyway. "My mother is awake," Dominic said, turning back to her. "Good. Tell her to drink fluids." She fired the private nursing staff I hired, threw a glass pitcher at the charge nurse. Dominic slipped his hands into his coat pockets. "She won't let anyone touch the dressings. She says they're clumsy. She says they asked too many questions. She wants you." Sadie let out a breath, rubbing her temples. "Look." "Dominic, right?" "Yes. I am a registered nurse. I worked at a crappy urgent care because I got laid off from County General during budget cuts. I am not a concierge doctor for whatever it is you people do." "What do we do, Sadie?" His voice was perfectly flat. "You drive armored SUVs, carry guns, and carry around bricks of cash to buy silence. I'm not stupid. I want nothing to do with it. You owe me nothing. I owe you nothing. Have a nice life." Dominic didn't move. "She won't let the doctors change the packing. The wound is seeping. She's running a low-grade fever. If it gets infected, she dies." "Then take her to a real hospital." "I can't." The admission hung in the air, heavy and jagged. For a fraction of a second, the cold, untouchable facade cracked. Dominic looked exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that seeps into the bone marrow. "The people who put that knife in her," Dominic said quietly, "are looking for her." They have eyes in the police department. They have eyes in the hospital networks. If she registers at a trauma center, she won't survive the night. I have a sterile room set up at my home. I have the equipment. I need someone she trusts to keep her alive. She doesn't know me. I dragged her out of a puddle. She trusts you because you didn't leave her there, and because you aren't one of us. Dominic pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket and set it on the small, scratched kitchen counter. $10,000 a week. You live on site until she's healed. When it's over, you walk away. I'll make sure you get a position at any hospital in the state. Sadie looked at the paper. It was a blank check. I pack light, she said. The drive took 40 minutes, winding deep into the wooded hills outside the city limits. The rain had finally stopped, leaving a heavy, clinging fog in its wake. Sadie sat in the back of the SUV, staring out the tinted windows. Dominic sat beside her, silent, answering a string of text messages on a burner phone. They passed through a set of wrought iron gates that opened automatically. There were cameras mounted on the stone pillars, and Sadie saw the unmistakable silhouette of a man standing just inside the tree line, holding a rifle across his chest. The house wasn't a tacky McMansion. It was a sprawling, brutalist structure of concrete, dark wood, and massive panes of glass. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress that had hired a very good interior designer. "Stay close," Dominic said, as the SUV parked in the circular driveway. Sadie grabbed her duffel bag. Inside were 5 sets of scrubs, a few pairs of jeans, and her own stethoscope. The interior of the house was aggressively quiet. The floors were polished dark stone. The air smelled like cedarwood and floor wax. Men in suits moved quietly through the intersecting hallways, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Dominic led her up a wide, floating staircase to the second floor. 2 men flanked a set of heavy double doors at the end of the hall. They stepped aside as Dominic approached. He opened the door and ushered Sadie in. The bedroom was massive, but it had been entirely transformed. The king-sized bed was gone, replaced by a mechanized hospital bed. IV poles, a heart monitor, and a crash cart sat against the far wall. The heavy blackout curtains were drawn shut. Carmela lay in the bed. Without the grime and the blood, Sadie could see how formidable the woman truly was. Her silver hair was brushed back. Her face was lined, but the bone structure was sharp and proud. She looked pale, but her hazel eyes snapped toward the door the moment it opened. "About time," Carmela rasped. "She was reluctant," Dominic said, standing at the foot of the bed. He looked down at his mother, his posture stiffening. The dynamic between them was palpable, a suffocating mix of deep devotion and silent, warring authority. "Everyone is reluctant until you pay them enough," Carmela said, her eyes shifting to Sadie. "Come here, girl. The butchers my son hired left the tape peeling." Sadie dropped her bag. She walked over to the stainless steel sink, set up in the corner, thoroughly washed her hands, and pulled on a pair of blue nitrile gloves from a box on the counter. She approached the bed. "I need to check the site," Sadie said, her voice dropping into its familiar, clinical rhythm. She didn't look at Dominic. She focused entirely on the patient. "It's going to hurt." "I've had worse," Carmela muttered. Sadie carefully peeled back the heavy layer of gauze taped to Carmela's abdomen. The skin around the stitches was red and hot to the touch. The wound was weeping a yellowish fluid. "It's starting to get infected," Sadie said bluntly. "You need broad-spectrum antibiotics, IV push, now." "They're in the mini fridge," Dominic said from the doorway. Sadie walked over, pulled the vials, and expertly drew the medication into a syringe. She pushed it through the port in Carmela's IV line. "Who did this to you?" Sadie asked, keeping her eyes on the IV port, flushing it with saline. The room went dead silent. Dominic shifted his weight. "That's not your concern." "It is my concern," Sadie fired back, looking over her shoulder at him. "Because if she was stabbed with a clean kitchen knife, we are dealing with standard bacteria. If she was stabbed with a rusted shiv in an alley, I need to know if she's up to date on her tetanus and what kind of necrotic tissue I need to watch for. So I'll ask again. What was the weapon?" Carmela let out a low, raspy chuckle that quickly turned into a cough. She winced, grabbing her side. "I like her, Dom. She doesn't flinch." "It was a combat knife," Dominic said, his jaw tightening. "Serrated edge, carbon steel." "Thank you." Sadie turned back to Carmela. "I need to clean this out and repack it. We're going to use wet-to-dry dressings to pull the dead tissue out. You're going to want to bite down on something." For the next 20 minutes, Sadie worked. It was brutal, agonizing work. Carmela didn't scream, but the sweat beaded on her forehead, and her knuckles turned white as she gripped the bed rails. Dominic stood perfectly still in the corner of the room, his eyes locked on his mother's face, his breathing shallow. When it was done, Sadie secured a fresh, sterile bandage. She disposed of the biohazard waste and peeled off her gloves. Carmela's eyes were closed, her chest rising and falling in an exhausted rhythm. "She'll sleep now," Sadie said quietly. Dominic nodded once. He gestured for Sadie to follow him. They walked out into the hallway. The two guards closed the doors seamlessly behind them. Dominic walked down the hall to a small, private study. He poured a finger of amber liquid from a crystal decanter into a glass and offered it to Sadie. "I don't drink on the clock," she said. Dominic drank it himself. "You're good at what you do. I've had a lot of practice cleaning up messes." Sadie leaned against the heavy oak desk. "Your mother is tough, but she's old, Dominic. The infection is taking a toll on her heart. She needs a real surgical team on standby just in case. I have a doctor arriving from Chicago tomorrow morning. He operates off the books. Until then, it's you." Dominic set the glass down. He looked at her, really looked at her. "Why did you snap at me in there?" "Because you were hovering, and you were withholding medical information. People usually don't raise their voice to me. People usually aren't trying to keep your mother from going septic." Sadie met his gaze. The bruising color of his eyes was intense up close. "I don't care who you are. In that room, I'm the boss. You want her to live, you listen to me." Dominic stepped closer. The proximity was deliberate, designed to intimidate. Sadie could smell the scotch on his breath, mixed with that dark, expensive cedar. She didn't back away. "You're very brave, Sadie," he said softly, the gravel in his voice scraping against the quiet room. "Or very stupid." "I'm just tired," she said honestly. "Show me where I'm sleeping." 4 days bled into one another. The rhythm of the compound was rigid. Sadie woke at 6, checked Carmela's vitals, changed the dressings, and administered the antibiotics. By the 3rd day, the fever broke. The redness around the incision retreated. Carmela was an awful patient. She was demanding, sharp-tongued, and refused to eat the bland food the compound chef prepared. But she respected Sadie. When Sadie told her to shut up and take her pills, Carmela did. Dominic was a ghost. Sadie saw him in passing, always in a suit, always flanked by men, always speaking in low, urgent tones. The house felt like a coiled spring. There were more guards at the gate now. The heavy iron shutters on the lower floor were drawn at sunset. On the afternoon of the 4th day, Sadie realized she didn't have her medication. She had a prescription for thyroid medication sitting on the counter in her apartment. She couldn't skip it, and she hadn't packed it in her rush. She found Dominic in the kitchen, staring at a laptop screen. "I need to go back to my apartment," she said. He didn't look up. "No." It's not a request. I have medication I need to take. I'll be gone for an hour. Dominic finally looked at her. I'll send Paulie to get it. No, it's my apartment. I don't want a 6'5" hitman rummaging through my bathroom. Sadie crossed her arms. I'm a nurse, not a hostage. You said I could walk away when this is done. Let me go get my pills, or I walk right now. Dominic's eyes narrowed. He snapped the laptop shut. Fine. But you don't go alone. Dante will drive you. You go in, you grab your things, you come straight back. Do not stop. Do not speak to anyone. Dante was younger than Paulie, leaner, with restless, scanning eyes. He drove a black sedan, taking a circuitous route back into the city. The rain had returned, slicking the streets with a greasy sheen. When they pulled up to Sadie's apartment building, Dante put the car in park and kept the engine running. I'll go up with you, Dante said, unbuckling his seatbelt. It's 4 flights of stairs and the hallway smells like cat urine. I'll be 2 minutes. Sadie didn't wait for his argument. She pushed out of the car and jogged up the concrete steps to the entrance. The building was quiet. Too quiet. Usually Mrs. Gable's television blared on the 2nd floor, but today the stairwell was silent except for the squeak of Sadie's sneakers on the linoleum. She reached the 4th floor. Her door was slightly ajar. Sadie stopped. The wood around the lock was splintered. Someone had pried it open. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She should turn around. She should run down the stairs and tell Dante. But instinct, stupid and primal, pushed her forward. Her mother's ring was in that apartment. The cash was in the freezer. She pushed the door open gently. The apartment had been gutted. The futon was slashed open, cotton spilling onto the floor. The textbooks were kicked across the room. The kitchen cabinets were hanging off their hinges. Look who came home. Sadie spun around. A man stepped out of her tiny bathroom. He wasn't one of Dominic's men. He wore a faded leather jacket and had a jagged, angry scar running from his ear to his collarbone. He held a suppressed pistol in his right hand, casual, like it was an extension of his arm. Before Sadie could scream, a hand clamped over her mouth from behind. A heavy arm wrapped around her waist, lifting her off her feet. She kicked wildly, her heel connecting with a shin. The man behind her grunted, but didn't let go. Where is she? The man with the scar asked, stepping closer. The old lady. You patched her up at that clinic. Where did they take her? Sadie bit down hard on the hand over her mouth. The flesh tore. Bitch! The man behind her threw her forward. Sadie crashed into the small kitchen island. Pain exploded in her ribs. She scrambled, her hand blindly searching the counter. Her fingers closed around the handle of her heavy ceramic coffee mug, half full of days-old, cold coffee. She hurled it at the man with the scar. It caught him square in the forehead. The ceramic shattered. He stumbled backward, blood instantly rushing into his eyes. Sadie bolted for the door. She made it 2 steps into the hallway before a heavy fist caught her in the back of the head. The world tilted violently. She hit the floor, her vision swimming with black spots. The copper taste of blood flooded her mouth. Grab her, a voice growled above her. We'll take her to Russo. She'll talk. Hands grabbed her jacket, dragging her across the rough carpet. Sadie fought to stay conscious, fighting the heavy, pulling darkness. Then, a sound. Thwip, thwip. 2 muffled, sickening thuds. The hands dragging Sadie instantly went slack. A heavy weight collapsed next to her on the floor. Sadie rolled over, clutching her head. The man who had dragged her was lying on his back, a neat, dark hole directly in the center of his forehead. The man with the scar was slumped against the wall, his chest wet with blood, his dead eyes staring at the ceiling. At the end of the hallway stood Dominic. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His sleeves were rolled up. In his right hand, he held a sleek, black handgun, with a long suppressor screwed onto the barrel. Smoke curled faintly from the muzzle. His face was a mask of absolute, terrifying violence. He didn't look at the bodies. He stepped over them. He knelt beside Sadie. His hands, usually so still and composed, hovered over her, not quite touching her, searching for the source of the blood on her face. "Are you hit?" His voice was frantic, the gravel completely stripped away. "No," Sadie gasped, sitting up slowly. The world spun. "He hit me." Dominic slipped his arm under her shoulders, pulling her up. He pressed her face against his chest, shielding her view of the dead men. His heart was slamming against his ribs, a frantic, violent rhythm against her ear. "Dante is dead," Dominic said quietly into her hair. "They shot him in the car. I followed him when you left. I knew it was a risk." Sadie gripped the fabric of his shirt. She was shaking now. The adrenaline was fading, leaving only cold terror. "They were looking for your mother," she whispered. "I know." Dominic pulled back slightly, looking down at her. His dark eyes were raging, a storm of guilt and fury. He reached up, his thumb gently wiping a smear of blood from her cheek. "You're a target now, Sadie. They know who you are. They know you helped us." "I can't stay here," she said, looking at her ruined apartment. "No," Dominic said, his voice hardening into stone. He stood, pulling her up with him, keeping his arm firmly around her waist. "You're coming with me, and you are never coming back to this place again." Rain lashed against the windshield of the armored SUV, heavy and relentless, distorting the streetlights into angry yellow smears. Sadie sat in the passenger seat, her knees pulled tight to her chest. She was shaking. It wasn't the cold, it was the adrenaline draining from her system, leaving behind a hollow, vibrating shock. Dominic drove. He drove with a terrifying, absolute focus. His knuckles were white on the leather steering wheel. The suppressed pistol rested on his thigh, a brutal anchor in the quiet cab. The smell of gunpowder had followed them into the car, a sharp, metallic odor that clung to his skin and his clothes. It mixed with the faint scent of the cheap vanilla air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror. Dante's car. Dante was dead. Her apartment was a crime scene. 2 men were bleeding out on the cheap carpet of her hallway. Sadie touched the back of her head. Her fingers came away slick and wet. The pain was starting to bloom, a dull, rhythmic throb that pulsed with every beat of her heart. "Don't touch it," Dominic said. He didn't look away from the road. His voice was completely stripped of its usual gravelly composure. It sounded tight, frayed. "I'm bleeding," Sadie whispered. Her voice sounded thin to her own ears. "I know. Keep pressure on it with the jacket." She looked down at the dark wool overcoat he had draped over her shoulders before shoving her into the car. It smelled like him. Cedarwood, rain, and that faint, sharp edge of violence. She pulled the lapel up, pressing the thick fabric against the laceration on her scalp. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the image of the dead man staring at her ceiling. They passed through the heavy iron gates of the compound 20 minutes later. The security presence had tripled. Men in heavy tactical gear stood in the downpour, rifles slung across their chests, their faces hidden by the shadows of the trees. The iron gates locked shut behind them with a heavy, final clang. Dominic killed the engine in the circular driveway. He didn't wait for a guard to open the door. He shoved his way out, walked around the hood of the car, and opened Sadie's door. He reached in, sliding one arm under her knees and the other around her back. "I can walk," she protested weakly, her hands gripping his shoulders instinctively. "Shut up," he said, pulling her against his chest. He carried her into the house. The grand foyer, usually quiet and still, was chaotic. Paulie was standing by the staircase, holding a radio, barking orders in rapid Italian. 2 other men were loading magazines on the long dining table. When they saw Dominic walk in, carrying Sadie, the room went dead silent. "Dante is gone," Dominic said to Paulie. He didn't stop walking. "Russo's men found the apartment. They were waiting. Double the perimeter. Nobody sleeps tonight." Paulie's jaw tightened. He nodded once, turning back to the men at the table. Dominic carried Sadie up the wide, floating staircase, bypassing Carmela's room entirely. He kicked open the door to the master suite at the end of the hall. It was massive, stark, and immaculately clean. He didn't take her to the bed. He carried her straight into the adjoining bathroom, sitting her gently on the edge of the wide, marble vanity. The harsh fluorescent light of the bathroom hit Sadie's eyes, and she winced, turning her face away. Dominic turned on the faucet, letting the water run warm. He stripped off his ruined shirt, throwing it into the corner. His chest and arms were heavily muscled, crisscrossed with old, faded scars. He grabbed a thick white towel, soaked a corner of it under the running water, and turned back to her. "Look at me," he commanded softly. Sadie kept her eyes fixed on the grey marble floor. The shaking had returned, violent tremors running through her arms and legs. Dominic stepped between her knees. He placed 2 fingers under her chin, applying just enough pressure to force her to look up. His eyes, usually so bruised and distant, were entirely focused on her. They were searching for a crack, searching for the moment she broke. "You're in shock," he said, gently pressing the warm, wet towel to the side of her face, wiping away the dried blood smeared across her cheek. "A man tried to drag me away," she breathed, the words tumbling out disjointed. "He hit me with a coffee mug. No, I hit him. He hit me with his fist." "I know. I don't have a home anymore." The realization crashed over her, heavy and suffocating. "My textbooks. My mother's ring was in a jewelry box in the bathroom. They broke the door." Dominic stopped wiping. He looked down at her, his jaw clenching so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. He tossed the stained towel into the sink and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small, worn velvet box. Sadie stared at it. "I grabbed it off the floor before I carried you out," Dominic said. He placed the box gently into her trembling hands. "I saw the photos on the fridge. I assumed it was important." Sadie opened the box. The simple gold band sat untouched on the worn velvet. She let out a jagged, broken breath. The tears she had been fighting finally spilled over, hot and silent, tracking down her dirty cheeks. Dominic didn't say anything. He didn't offer empty platitudes about it being okay. It wasn't okay. He simply stepped closer, wrapping his arms around her, pressing her face against his bare chest. He held her tight, his hand resting on the back of her head, avoiding the wound. "I'm sorry," he murmured into her hair, his voice rough. "I brought this to your door. I told you you could walk away, and I made it a lie." Sadie pressed her face into his skin. He was warm. He was solid. In a world that had just violently ripped itself apart, he was the only thing standing still. "Turn around," Dominic said gently a few minutes later, stepping back. "Let me look at your head." Sadie turned, presenting the back of her head to him. She felt his large, calloused fingers gently parting her hair. His touch was surprisingly delicate. "It's not deep," he diagnosed. "You won't need stitches. But it's going to hurt like hell tomorrow." He cleaned the wound meticulously with antiseptic from a cabinet, taping a sterile gauze pad over the laceration. Sadie watched him in the mirror. He moved with a quiet, practiced efficiency. This wasn't the first time he had patched someone up. "Dominic," she said to his reflection. He met her eyes in the mirror. "Yeah." "Who is Russo?" His hand stopped. He picked up a roll of medical tape and slowly put it back in the drawer. "He's the man who put the knife in my mother," Dominic said flatly. "He runs the docks on the east side. He decided my family has held the port contracts for too long. He thought if he cut the head off the snake, the rest of us would scatter. But he missed. He hit her. That's close enough." Dominic turned her around on the vanity, resting his hands on either side of her hips. "Russo knows you kept her alive. He knows you're here. The attack at your apartment wasn't just to find her. It was to punish you for interfering." Sadie looked at him. The fear was still there, cold and sharp in her stomach. But beneath it, a strange, grim acceptance was taking root. The cheap apartment, the grueling shifts at the clinic, the constant, grinding panic over rent. That life was dead. It died on the floor of her hallway. "So what happens now?" she asked. Dominic's eyes darkened. "Now, we lock the doors, and we wait for them to make a mistake." Sleep was impossible. Sadie lay in the center of the massive bed in Dominic's guest room, staring at the ceiling. The clock on the bedside table glared red. 3:00 a.m. The compound was silent, but it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the taut, humming silence of a tripwire waiting to be snapped. Downstairs, the heavy steel security shutters had been engaged, sealing the windows behind impenetrable metal. The house felt like a submarine, deep underwater, enduring the crushing pressure. Sadie threw off the covers. She was still wearing a pair of clean scrubs she found in the closet. Her head pounded a dull, relentless rhythm. She walked out into the hallway. The lights were dimmed to a low amber glow. The two guards stationed outside Carmela's room looked tense, their hands resting near the holsters on their belts. "I need to check her vitals," Sadie whispered to the guard on the left. He nodded and opened the heavy wooden door. The bedroom was dark, save for the weak glow of the heart monitor. Sadie walked quietly to the side of the bed. Carmela's eyes were open. They caught the ambient light, sharp and predatory. "You look like hell, girl," the old woman rasped. "I got hit with a door," Sadie lied, checking the IV line. "How's the pain?" "Manageable." Carmela shifted, pulling her hand from beneath the heavy duvet. She wasn't holding the remote for the television. She was holding a silver, short-barreled revolver. It rested easily in her palm. Sadie paused, her fingers hovering over the IV port. "Is that really necessary?" "Russo is a rabid dog," Carmela said, her voice dry as dust. "Rabid dogs don't wait for the morning." Before Sadie could respond, the power cut out. The ambient amber lights in the hallway died. The heart monitor beeped once, loudly, before going black. Plunged into absolute darkness, the room felt instantly smaller. 3 seconds later, the red emergency backup lights flared on, casting the bedroom in a brutal, bloody wash. Then came the sound. It wasn't a loud explosion. It was a heavy, structural shudder that vibrated through the floorboards, rattling the medication vials on the stainless steel tray. A breach. Someone had blown the reinforced door off the back patio. "Get down!" Carmela hissed. Sadie didn't hesitate. She dropped to the floor, pressing her back against the side of the heavy mechanized bed. Her pulse thudded heavily in her throat. Outside the bedroom door, chaos erupted. The muffled, rapid thwip, thwip, thwip of suppressed gunfire was instantly answered by the deafening, unsuppressed roar of automatic rifles. Someone screamed in Italian. Heavy boots pounded on the hardwood floors down the hall. The smell of cordite drifted up through the air conditioning vents, sharp and burning. They were inside the house. "Sadie!" Carmela's voice was strained. She was trying to sit up, her face tight with agony, as her abdominal muscles pulled against the fresh stitches. "Don't move." Sadie reached up, grabbing the old woman's shoulder to keep her pinned to the mattress. "You'll tear the sutures. If you bleed out now, there's no clinic to drag you to." "They're coming for this room," Carmela grunted, gripping the silver revolver. "You need to get in the bathroom. Lock the door. Hide in the tub." "I'm not leaving you here." "I don't need a nurse right now. I need a shooter." "Move!" The gunfire in the hallway grew louder. It was deafening, a frantic exchange of violence happening just on the other side of the heavy oak doors. Sadie heard a body hit the wall out there, followed by a wet, heavy thud. The doorknob turned violently. It was locked from the inside. 2 heavy impacts hit the wood near the lock, shotgun blasts. The oak splintered, the heavy brass lock mechanism giving way. The door was kicked open. A man stepped into the red emergency light. He wore tactical gear, a heavy balaclava masking his face, an assault rifle raised to his shoulder. He scanned the room, sweeping the barrel toward the bed. Carmela fired first. The silver revolver barked, a deafening crack in the enclosed space. The bullet caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him backward into the doorframe. He grunted, stumbling, but he didn't go down. He swung his rifle back toward the bed, pulling the trigger blindly as he recovered his balance. Wood splintered above Sadie's head. Plaster rained down on her hair. Carmela fired twice more, but the recoil in her weakened state threw her aim wide. One bullet shattered the mirror on the far wall. The other buried itself in the ceiling. The man righted himself, aiming directly at the center of the bed. Sadie didn't think. Instinct, raw and terrifying, took over. She grabbed the heavy metal IV pole beside her and shoved it violently forward, straight into the man's shins. He tripped, his rifle dipping. A short burst of automatic fire chewed into the hardwood floor inches from Sadie's knee. Before the man could recover, a massive shadow filled the doorway behind him. Dominic grabbed the back of the man's tactical vest. He didn't use a gun. He dragged the man backward into the hallway with brutal, terrifying strength. Sadie heard the sickening sound of bone snapping, followed by a heavy, final drop. Dominic stepped into the doorway. His white shirt was soaked in blood, not his own. He held his suppressed pistol in his right hand. He was breathing hard, his dark eyes scanning the room frantically. "Sadie!" She scrambled out from behind the bed. "I'm okay. I'm okay." Dominic's chest heaved. He crossed the room in 3 strides, dropping to one knee in front of her. His hands hovered over her face, checking for injuries, his thumb grazing her jawline. "They breached the east wing," Dominic said, his voice a low, lethal hum. "Paulie holds the stairs, but they're pushing hard." "Dom!" Carmela's voice was weak. Dominic and Sadie both turned. Carmela had dropped the revolver. Her hand was pressed hard against her lower abdomen. The white bandages beneath her silk robe were rapidly turning a bright, wet crimson. The sudden movement and the recoil had torn the artery clamp. "Damn it!" Sadie swore, scrambling to her feet. She ripped open a sterile gauze pack. "She's hemorrhaging. If we don't pack this now, she has 10 minutes. "Do it!" Dominic ordered. "I need light!" Sadie yelled, pressing her hands down on the wound. Dominic holstered his weapon. He pulled a heavy tactical flashlight from his belt, clicking it on and holding the blinding white beam directly over his mother's stomach. The gunfire downstairs echoed through the floorboards, vibrating against Sadie's knees as she fought to keep the old woman alive in the dark. The morning light was grey and washed out, filtering weakly through the shattered glass of the living room windows. The storm had finally broken, leaving the compound slick and ruined. The gunfire had stopped hours ago. Russo's men were dead. 9 of them. Their bodies had already been dragged out, loaded into unmarked vans, and driven away to disappear into the earth or the ocean. Paulie was sitting on the ruined leather sofa in the foyer, an ice pack pressed to his swollen face, smoking a cigarette in defiance of Carmela's strict indoor ban. Sadie sat on the bottom step of the grand staircase. Her hands were clean, but her fingernails were still faintly stained. She had managed to stop the bleeding. She threw new stitches into Carmela's muscle wall by the light of Dominic's flashlight, her hands steady while the house literally shook with violence around them. Carmela was stabilized, sleeping under a heavy dose of morphine. Footsteps sounded on the hardwood. Dominic walked into the foyer. He had finally changed out of his ruined clothes. He wore dark jeans and a black sweater, the sleeves pushed up to his elbows. He looked exhausted. The brutal, coiled energy that usually defined him had burned away, leaving a quiet, dangerous stillness. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs, looking down at Sadie. "My man checked your apartment," Dominic said quietly. "The police tape is up. Russo's men left a mess. It's on the local news." Sadie didn't look up. She traced a splinter on the hardwood stair. "So I'm officially a missing person." "No, I had someone hack the municipal database. Your employment record at St. Jude's is erased. Your lease agreement is voided. You don't exist in that apartment anymore." Sadie finally looked up. "You deleted me. I protected you." Dominic stepped closer, sitting down on the step beside her. He didn't crowd her, but the heat of his proximity was undeniable. "I have a passport for you, a new name, a bank account in Zurich with enough money to make sure you never have to empty a bedpan or worry about rent again. There's a car waiting outside. It will take you to an airstrip. You can go to Europe, South America, anywhere." He pulled a thick manila envelope from his jacket and held it out to her. Sadie looked at the envelope. It was heavy. It was freedom. It was everything she had stressed over, cried over, and worked herself to the bone for over the last 5 years. She reached out, but she didn't take the envelope. She put her hand over his. His knuckles were bruised, the skin broken and healing. His hand tensed under hers, but he didn't pull away. "I spent my whole life being invisible," Sadie said, her voice quiet, but entirely steady. "I walked past people sleeping in the rain because I couldn't afford to care. I was exhausted, Dominic. Just bone-deep, soul-crushing, exhausted." She looked at his face, at the bruised glass of his eyes. "I stopped in that alley because I was tired of being invisible. I dragged your mother out of that puddle because, for 5 minutes, I wanted to be the one who decided if someone lived or died." Sadie's fingers curled, gripping in his rough hand tightly. "I don't want to disappear again. I don't want a fake name on a beach somewhere, pretending the world isn't ugly." Dominic stared at her. The air between them grew thick, heavy with the unspoken weight of what she was offering. "This world is soaked in blood, Sadie," he warned, his voice a low, rough whisper. "If you stay, it doesn't get cleaner. It gets darker, and you don't get to walk away a second time." "I know. They will always come for us." "Then we shoot back," she said plainly. Dominic closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. A sharp, jagged exhale left his chest. When he opened his eyes again, the walls were gone. He dropped the envelope onto the stairs. He reached up, his large hand cupping the side of her face, his thumb carefully avoiding the bandage on her head. He leaned in. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was desperate, bruising, and tasted like stale coffee, adrenaline, and survival. It was a promise signed in violence and sealed in the quiet aftermath of a war. Sadie kissed him back, pulling him down by the collar of his sweater, anchoring herself to the only real thing left in her world. She wasn't a poor nurse anymore, and she was never going back to the rain. Wow, what an intense ending. Sadie finally left her old life behind and chose Dominic's dark, dangerous world. Did she make the right choice, or is she in way over her head? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this gritty, slow-burn mafia romance, please smash that like button, share this story with your friends, and hit subscribe so you never miss another thrilling audio drama. Don't forget to ring the notification bell to stay updated on our latest videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.